please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
The United Nations Security Council emergency meeting over North Korea is still underway. We've heard from the United States, China, Russia, France in the past hour or so. Let us bring in Sherry, who is at the border between North and South Korea. Sherry, everybody in New York at the UN gets to say their piece, and I don't know, we'll just continue to watch to say whose court the ball really is in.
That's right, but I'm going to have to say that even with the latest missile launch by North Korea that we saw yesterday, even with the, quote, important announcement that North Korea followed up on, and the UN Security Council emergency meeting with Nikki Haley, U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, comments, fundamentally, things have not changed. North Korea keeps testing its missiles. Washington keeps pressuring China to do more. And here is what the Chinese ambassador to the United Nations had to say. Take a listen.
China expresses its great concern over and opposition to the latest missile launch by the DPRK. We strongly urge the DPRK to comply with relevant Security Council resolutions and cease actions that escalate the tensions on the Korean Peninsula.
So it certainly looks like nothing has been changed. Basically, Beijing is saying that, yes, we will do our part that's required by the UN Security Council resolutions, and all the other players need to do their part. So basically, sort of keeping its distance from the core of the tensions, and that's been its line. Basically, this latest tension between on North Korea is really between North Korea and the United States. And we also heard from the Russians as well, basically saying that the U.S. and South Korea need to stop carrying out their military exercises. So again, this latest missile test or missile launch yesterday is giving all these relevant countries yet another opportunity to say their piece. That's really self-serving at this point. Bernie?
Sherry, let's talk to somebody we've talked to very, very often at times like this, and that is Sun Young Lee, professor of Korean Studies at the Fletcher School, Tufts University in Massachusetts. Professor, thank you very much for joining Sherry Me. It is very telling, the kind of language that the Chinese and the Russians have used. They have a vested interest, don't you think, in having this situation continue and having this impasse, this détente continuing. They have no vested interest in seeing a resolution to the North Korean issue.
Well, China and Russia wouldn't mind if the North Korean nuclear saga, which is now quarter-century old, would be resolved. At the same time, they're not really rattled by this. They don't mind too much. Of course, the U.S. and its allies, principally South Korea and Japan, have very different views of North Korea's intentions and very different national interests. This year has been really a banner year for the Kim regime. Now, 3 successful ICBM tests, and the most recent one showed that North Korea now has the capacity to strike every corner of the U.S. homeland, continental United States, whereas even a few months ago, that eventuality seemed rather far-fetched, almost science fiction. But there will come a day quite soon when North Korea's threat will become palpable, imminent, and the image or even the sound of Kim Jong-un's nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missiles screaming across the sky over the Pacific toward the United States will become a reality.
That is very scary. Professor Lee, the ROK is speaking right now at the SecCon. Let's listen in.
The diplomatic presence and relations with North Korea. It was amidst these concerted actions by the whole international community that North Korea came up with yet another launch of a ballistic missile with intercontinental range. We simply cannot and should not take such a reckless provocation less seriously than any other previous provocations by North Korea. For the past 2 months, some view that the absence of North Korean provocations following the Hwasong-12 launch on September 15th might indicate that North Korea was finally awakened to a stark reality. Others had high hopes that North Korea would continue its restraint in the spirit of the Olympic Truce Resolution that we all adopted by consensus at the plenary session of the General Assembly earlier this month. Some even saw a possible window of opportunity from this relatively long period of silence that might tip the balance towards an easing of the tensions on the Korean peninsula. These well-intentioned hopes may well evaporate following North Korea's missile provocation yesterday. But it is premature yet to give up our hope. Our road towards the denuclearization of North Korea has once again proven to be extremely bumpy, but we should not stop here due to frustration. Narrow as it may be, there is still a window of opportunity. We need to remain patient and persistent in our diplomatic efforts to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. The Security Council should never stop sending out an unequivocal message that a nuclear North Korea with ballistic missile capability is unacceptable, and renew its unwavering commitment to stepping up sanctions and pressure until North Korea finally abandons its nuclear and missile programs. North Korea, for its part, must not take lightly the message coming out of today's meeting of the Security Council. If North Korea continues to underestimate or miscalculate the firm resolve of the international community, it will transpire to be a grave mistake. North Korea should be awakened from its false sense of security. We urge Pyongyang once again to seize the rapidly closing window of opportunity to resolve its nuclear problem peacefully and thereby ensure its security. As has been repeatedly
the ROK representative to the UN SecCoun there speaking in New York. Let us go back to Sun Young Lee from Tufts University stateside. Professor, we just heard from the ROK representative to the Security Council. Why do you think people keep talking about bringing the DPRK back to the negotiating table? They've shown absolutely no inkling, no tendency, no inclination to negotiate anything. The reality is, when Resolution 2375 was adopted, what we had was caps on oil exports, caps on labor contracts, but sanctions have not been milked at the primary level, let alone at the secondary level. There's a lot more room for China and Russia to move on sanctions. Those need to be exhausted before phase 2, don't you think?
That's right, and North Korea will remain unfazed by even full-fledged enforcement of sanctions in the foreseeable future. It can survive for the next several months, even if China and Russia were to close all sanctions loopholes, which is impossible. So what will North Korea do? North Korea has a need to escalate even further. It's made the point yesterday that it can hit every part of the United States. What else does it need to do? It needs to make the powerful point that it can conduct a thermonuclear, a hydrogen bomb test via an intercontinental ballistic missile. So a very powerful thermonuclear test in outer space, that is North Korea's next big move. And after that, North Korea might climb down a rung or two down the ladder of escalation and call for talks. And North Korea will be very well positioned to negotiate from a position of strength vis-a-vis the US and South Korea on all kinds of issues, not only military, nuclear issues, but economic, political, cultural issues. And that is North Korea's endgame, to be able to bully its adversaries at will.
Professor, this is Sherry joining the conversation. You know, the prerequisite that the U.S. and South Korea keep bringing up for that kind of negotiations or any form of talks with North Korea is denuclearization. With yesterday's development, with yesterday's missile launch and the announcement, do you think it's time for the U.S. and South Korea to get realistic here and come down a bit with their expectations?
When the atmospherics change, for example, when the new year rolls in and North Korea launches a peace offensive using more carrot rather than stick, and when the dynamics in the region change with in the aftermath of the Winter Olympiad, if North Korea sends athletes, for example, to South Korea, that would change the atmosphere in the Korean peninsula, and it would be more conducive to negotiations with less stringent preconditions. But the problem is, North Korea says denuclearization is off the table. Freeze for freeze. U.S. and South Korea suspending joint military exercises in return for North Korea putting a cap on nuclear and missile tests. That's off the table. They're not interested. So it's really North Korea that's playing hardball rather than the other side.
So what would be your reading into the yesterday's announcement that North Korea made after the missile launch? It certainly sounded like, no, we're not going to use it to preemptively strike. It's actually for self-defense. Give us the recognition as a nuclear state, then we can potentially start talking again. That was my reading. What do you say, Professor?
Well, that's what North Korea's been saying for over 60 years since the end of the Korean War. It's U.S. hostile policy that pushes North Korea to boost its deterrence, defense capabilities. In the 90s, North Korea lied that it did not have a nuclear weapons program, and all it wanted was a security guarantee, a peace treaty. In the 2000s and over the past decade, North Korea has kept to the line that it's afraid of an imminent U.S. invasion or preemptive nuclear strike, so North Korea needs to deter the United States by developing nuclear weapons, and it seeks no harm other than just pure self-defense. This is bogus because, yes, nuclear weapons give you powerful deterrence. At the same time, there are offensive, political even, offensive properties that come with nuclear weapons. North Korea wants to be able to evict the U.S. troops from South Korea, to isolate, emasculate South Korea, to bully Japan. North Korea has a lot of to-do lists on its strategic game plan, and it's methodically making progress toward that goal of one day prevailing over South Korea.
Professor, kind of an open-ended final question here. What are we waiting for next?
We are waiting for Kim Jong-un to conduct a major hydrogen bomb test above the Pacific, and you could interpret that in different ways. You know, that specific threat was made back in September by the North Korean foreign minister. It could be a nuclear-tipped missile test some 5,000 kilometers above ground, as North Korea just showed yesterday. The missile on a lofted trajectory flew about 4,500 kilometers. In that case, probably the radiation EMP fallout would not be lethal. It would not damage any infrastructure on the ground in the Korean peninsula or in the region. North Korea would have not inflicted any loss of human lives or destruction of property, and it would have made its point that they can nuke Washington, D.C. at will. That's where North Korea is headed.
Wow, it may not be lethal, but that would be terrifying and harken back to the days of Castle Bravo and Tsar Bomba. Professor, thank you very much as usual for joining Sherry and me. And Sherry, you stay safe. We'll be with you in the next hour. The Japanese just reported at 50 past a miss for October industrial output, the 0.5% gain. According to the Ministry of External Trade and Industry, the polling had called for closer to 2%. The upside, or the positive, is that November output is seen at coming in closer to 3% when the previous forecast was for a negative or a contraction of about 1%, and December seen even better at up 3.5. So look toward now and next month, not so much October. South Korea, of course, joins Tokyo on the session at the top of the next hour. Let's check in with June to find out how the market is doing. June, the markets go on, North Korea or no North Korea?
Exactly, Bernie. That was the case yesterday, and we are expecting a very small drop for the Kospi and a positive start for the Kosdaq. So not too much volatility as seen at the pre-market indicators so far. The Minister of Finance of Korea, Kim Dong-yeon, has said that North Korea's latest missile launch is expected to have very limited impact on Korea's financial markets, but that they are currently closely monitoring the markets on the possibility that there is an increase, there may be an immediate increase of short-term volatility in the markets and that they're ready to respond to any of the changes in the markets. There was an emergency meeting held at the minister level yesterday after the launch of the ICBM, where the ministers did discuss contingency plans, especially for the financial markets. So far, the Minister of Finance says the financial markets and credit rating of Korea have remained stable throughout multiple provocations out of North Korea, so playing down concerns and the negative impact that this may have on the markets. And to quickly recap the market action yesterday, the Kospi closed unchanged. The Korean won actually strengthened against the US dollar, now at the strongest level in 2 years and 7 months. And the Bank of Korea's governor, Deputy Governor Yoon Myung-sik, has said that he also sees there to be very limited market impact from yesterday's launch in the currency and equity markets, and that the only place that it may affect is, to a very small extent, the non-deliverable forwards and the credit default swap indices. The Bank of Korea will be making a rate decision today, and as yesterday the missile launch was a very big deal for the monetary policy decision, we'll be watching very closely for the Bank of Korea's call coming out in just about an hour's time in the Korean markets. Squawk Box will be right back with the opening numbers for Seoul and Tokyo. Stay with us.